Picture the year 1943. The Second World War is consuming Europe like a furnace swallowing paper. Cities are burning. Families are being torn apart. Entire nations are bleeding out on frozen battlefields. Yet, inside a quiet, stone building on Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich, a Swiss banker sits behind a mahogany desk, calmly stamping paperwork. He is processing a deposit. He is not asking where it came from. He never is. The world looks at Switzerland and sees neutrality. It sees chocolate, mountain peaks, and precision watches. It sees a nation so disciplined, so orderly, that it somehow floated above the chaos of history untouched. That is the postcard version. That is the lie they sell beautifully. The real Switzerland is written not in tourist brochures, but in ledgers, secret ones, buried beneath centuries of calculated silence. Switzerland did not become wealthy because it worked harder than everyone else. It became wealthy because it made itself the most useful accomplice money could ever find. The balance sheet of Swiss prosperity is stained with the fingerprints of dictators, war criminals, tax fugitives, and stolen fortunes. And the most terrifying part of this story is not that it happened. The most terrifying part is how long it was celebrated as genius. Stand in Geneva today, and the city will make your jaw drop. Glass towers reflect the pale blue of Lake Leman. Private banks line the streets like silent sentinels, their brass plaques polished to a mirror shine. The air smells clean. The streets are spotless. Zurich, ranked year after year as one of the most livable cities on earth, hums with the efficiency of a place that has never known hunger or invasion. The Swiss franc is one of the hardest, most stable currencies in the world. The country manages over $2.4 trillion in foreign private wealth at its peak, making it the single largest offshore financial center on the planet. Swiss citizens enjoy some of the highest wages, lowest unemployment, and best healthcare access anywhere in the developed world. The country punches above its weight in pharmaceutical innovation, precision manufacturing, and global diplomacy. It gave the world the Red Cross. It hosts international peace negotiations. It projects an image of enlightened, clean-handed competence that other nations spend decades trying to imitate. But beneath the polished surface, the foundation was not built on virtue. It was built on something far colder. It was built on secrecy sold as a service. To understand this machine, you have to go back to the 1600s, when the geography of Switzerland first became its greatest asset. Landlocked, mountainous, and fragmented into cantons with competing loyalties, Switzerland had no empire to build and no navy to project power. So it did something smarter. It looked at the chaos surrounding it and decided to become indispensable to it. The cantons of Geneva and Zurich positioned themselves as neutral financial intermediaries between feuding European monarchies. French aristocrats, fleeing the instability of Versailles politics, began parking gold in Genevan banks as early as the mid-1600s. German princes followed. By 1750, the private banking families of Geneva were managing wealth for some of the most powerful dynasties in Europe. The key to their appeal was not their interest rates. Their key was their mouth. They kept it shut. Discretion was the product. Silence was the premium feature. And the wealthier and more dangerous the client, the higher the premium they charged for that silence. This was not passive. Swiss banking families actively cultivated the reputation of absolute confidentiality. They built it into their culture, their legal frameworks, and eventually their national identity. By the time the French Revolution ignited in 1789, Geneva was already the most trusted bolt in Europe. When the heads of French nobles began rolling into baskets, their gold did not follow them to the guillotine. It was already across the border, safe in Swiss hands, beyond the reach of the revolutionary government that desperately needed it. The revolutionary government sent envoys to Geneva demanding the accounts of French aristocrats be surrendered. The Swiss looked them in the eye and said no. They kept the money, they kept the silence, and they quietly collected their fees. Think about the audacity of that. A small, landlocked nation refusing to hand over stolen aristocratic wealth to a people's revolution. That was not neutrality. That was a business decision. For the next 130 years, this model deepened like roots in stone. Swiss banks became the preferred destination for European royalty, industrial barons, and colonial profiteers who wanted wealth stored beyond political reach. The infrastructure grew. Private banking dynasties multiplied. Zurich and Geneva became laboratories of financial engineering, inventing legal structures, trusts, and holding companies that could absorb wealth and make it invisible on any foreign ledger. But the machine was about to receive its most powerful upgrade. In 1934, the Swiss government passed Federal Banking Act Article 47. On paper, it was presented as a protection for depositors. The official narrative was compassionate. Switzerland needed to shield the accounts of German Jewish citizens from Nazi officials who were demanding. Swiss banks exposed their clients so the Reich could seize their assets. That part was real. The Nazis were absolutely doing this. Jewish families across Germany were being financially stripped before they were physically destroyed. And some of their money had reached Switzerland. That part is true. But Article 47 did not discriminate. It codified banking secrecy as an iron criminal law, meaning any Swiss banker who disclosed client information to any foreign authority for any reason would face criminal prosecution, fines, and imprisonment. Not just for Jewish accounts. For every account, it created a vault that no foreign government, no court, and no investigator could legally crack open. The law that was sold as protecting victims also wrapped its arms around the perpetrators. It was the moment a cultural habit became a legal fortress. The Nazis understood this immediately. By 1936, German Reich institutions were actively using Swiss banks to hold funds beyond Allied scrutiny. Nazi officials were parking personal fortunes in numbered accounts that existed on no registry, answered to no name, and legally could not be mentioned aloud by any Swiss employee. The Swiss National Bank itself was processing looted gold. Between 1939 and 1945, Switzerland received an estimated $440 million in Nazi gold. Much of it melted down from confiscated Jewish jewelry, dental fillings, and central bank reserves of conquered nations. The gold came in bloody. It left as clean Swiss francs. Let that number sink in. $440 million in 1940s dollars. That is roughly $8 billion in today's purchasing power. And this was just the gold, the liquid assets, the securities, the real estate transactions, the corporate accounts of companies supplying weapons to the Reich through Swiss intermediaries. Those numbers have never been fully calculated. What moved through Swiss books during the Second World War was a financial ecosystem built on the corpses of the 20th century's greatest catastrophe. After the war ended in 1945, the Allies knew something enormous had happened inside Swiss banks. American and British investigators arrived in Bern with files, evidence, and demands. The Swiss listened politely and gave them almost nothing. They cited Article 47. They cited neutrality. They buried them in legal procedure. The Allies pressed harder. The Swiss hired better lawyers. This dance continued for years. In 1946, the Washington Accord forced Switzerland to acknowledge that it had received looted Nazi gold and demanded $58 million in restitution. The Swiss paid it, but they paid only $58 million out of a total that investigators believed ran into hundreds of millions. They negotiated, dragged their feet, and eventually wrote a check that covered roughly a fraction of what their institutions had processed. The case closed. The ledger, the real one, stayed hidden. Meanwhile, the Swiss banking industry emerged from the ruble of World War II not weakened but supercharged. Its reputation as the world's ultimate financial fortress had been stress-tested by the worst possible circumstances and had held. The message to the global wealth class was thundering and clear. Switzerland keeps its secrets even when the world is burning, especially when the world is burning. Through the 1950s and 1960s, a new generation of clients arrived with fresh money and old habits. Latin American dictators who had built their regimes on American Cold War money began moving personal fortunes through Swiss conduits. African leaders, newly empowered in the post-colonial scramble, discovered that Swiss private banking asked no questions about where presidential funds originated. Middle Eastern oil wealth, particularly after the 1973 oil shock sent revenues exploding, flooded into Swiss accounts at a pace the banks had never seen before. Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines provides one of the most documented case studies. During his rule from 1965 to 1986, Marcos and his inner circle systematically looted the Philippine National Treasury. Estimates of his total personal fortune range between $5 billion and $10 billion, much of it stolen directly from state institutions and foreign aid packages. A substantial portion of this wealth, investigators later confirmed, flowed into Swiss accounts structured under shell companies and nominee names. When Marcos fled to Hawaii in February 1986, after a popular uprising, the Philippine government began the torturous process of reclaiming its stolen wealth from Swiss institutions. The Swiss legal system engaged, eventually, slowly, over years of proceedings that required the Philippines to meet an extraordinarily high burden of proof. The Swiss did return roughly $684 million in frozen Marcos assets by 2003, after more than 17 years of legal fighting. But the Philippine government consistently maintained that far more remained unaccounted for, buried in structures so complex and opaque that even with full cooperation, the full picture could not be reconstructed. That is the genius of the system. The complexity itself is the defense. Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire ran the same playbook. Between 1965 and 1997, Mobutu presided over a nation of extraordinary mineral wealth, cobalt, diamonds, copper, coltan, while his people descended into one of the most extreme poverty spirals on the African continent. His personal fortune was estimated at $5 billion. Swiss banks held critical portions of it. When Mobutu died in exile in 1997 and the Democratic Republic of Congo began fighting to reclaim its stolen resources, Swiss authorities froze some assets and later returned a portion. But the legal proceedings stretched across decades, draining the government's resources while Swiss institutions collected management fees throughout the entire process. This was not a glitch in the machine. It was the machine working exactly as designed. The pattern had a mechanical regularity to it. A kleptocrat loots a country. The money enters Switzerland. The regime falls. The victim country tries to recover the funds. Switzerland offers procedural cooperation while the real money shrinks behind legal walls. Some returns. Much does not. And through it all, the Swiss financial system profits on both ends, from the original deposits and from the administration of the recovery process. But political corruption was only one revenue stream. Parallel to the dictator money was the vast, quiet flood of private tax evasion. Through the second half of the 20th century, Swiss banks were aggressively recruiting wealthy individuals from across Europe, North America, and beyond, offering them something that should not have been legal anywhere: a place to park undeclared income where no foreign tax authority would ever find it. Swiss law drew a line between tax evasion and tax fraud. Fraud was criminal. Evasion was merely a civil matter. This distinction was not philosophical. It was a product specification. If a wealthy German businessman failed to declare his Zurich account to German tax authorities, Germany considered that criminal evasion. Switzerland considered it a private financial decision. Switzerland, therefore, had zero legal obligation to tell Germany the account existed. This made Switzerland a black hole for private wealth. Money entered, it never appeared on any foreign government's radar. Economists studying the hidden wealth flows estimate that by the 1990s, between $1 trillion and $1.7 trillion in assets belonging to foreign citizens sat in Swiss accounts, mostly undeclared to any tax authority on earth. Calculate the tax revenue those governments lost across decades. It runs into hundreds of billions. That is the money that should have funded hospitals in France, roads in Italy, teachers in the United States. Instead, it sat in Zurich, compounding quietly, generating management fees for Swiss private banks, and slowly building the gleaming financial infrastructure that the world mistakes for Swiss. It was a toll booth on the highway of global corruption, and it was extraordinarily lucrative. The smoking gun that cracked this system open carries the name of a single Swiss bank, UBS. By 2007, American investigators at the Department of Justice and the IRS had begun building a case against UBS that would eventually blow the doors off Swiss banking secrecy permanently. The evidence was damning in its specificity. UBS bankers had been traveling physically to the United States on tourist visas, soliciting American citizens as clients, advising them on how to structure offshore accounts in ways that would escape IRS detection. UBS maintained roughly 52,000 American accounts holding an estimated $14.8 billion in undeclared assets at the height of the scheme. In February 2009, UBS signed a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice. The fine was $780 million, but the truly seismic element was the data. UBS handed over the names and details of 4,450 American account holders. The single largest breach of Swiss banking secrecy since Article 47 was written in 1934. It was a foreclosure event. The legal architecture that Switzerland had spent 75 years constructing, reinforcing, and defending was punctured in a single negotiation room in Washington. The Swiss government was furious. Then it was pragmatic. Then it signed. Credit Suisse followed in 2014. After a criminal investigation confirmed that Credit Suisse had systematically helped American clients hide money from the IRS for decades, the bank pleaded guilty and paid a fine of $2.6 billion. It was the largest fine ever paid by a bank in a tax evasion case at that point. Credit Suisse executives sat in a Senate hearing room and absorbed a public humiliation that would have been unimaginable to any Swiss banker of the previous generation. The sovereignty of Swiss banking secrecy had met American prosecutorial firepower. The American balance sheet won. Switzerland then signed a series of international agreements, including the Automatic Exchange of Information Framework through the OECD, which committed Swiss banks to sharing account data with foreign tax authorities under qualifying conditions. The era of total secrecy was officially, publicly, formally declared over. The Swiss government made speeches. The banks issued statements. The world applauded. And then the world went back to depositing money in Switzerland. Because here is what did not change. The expertise did not evaporate. The legal infrastructure did not dismantle itself. The army of private bankers, trust lawyers, tax advisors, holding company architects, and estate planners who built their careers around Swiss financial engineering simply upgraded their tools. They moved from blunt secrecy to sophisticated legal optimization. They built structures that were technically compliant with new transparency rules while remaining practically impenetrable to foreign scrutiny. The line between illegal tax evasion and aggressive legal tax avoidance became the new product they sold, and Switzerland remained world-class at navigating it. The canton of Zug deserves its own chapter in this story. A small canton of barely 130,000 people. Zug hosts a staggering concentration of global commodity trading companies. Glencore, one of the world's largest commodity trading and mining corporations, is headquartered in Zug. So are dozens of other firms that control the flow of oil, copper, cobalt, grain, and metals from the developing world to global markets. Zug's corporate tax rate sits among the lowest in Europe. The profit from trading resources extracted from the Congo, from Nigeria, from Zambia, from Peru is booked in Zug. The resource-rich countries themselves see a fraction of it. This is not technically illegal. That is precisely the point. Switzerland evolved from a legal secrecy into legal extraction with such seamless efficiency that the world barely noticed the transition. The mountain stays the same. Only the tunnel through it changes. The full generational weight of Swiss banking history sits on the shoulders of the Holocaust victims, families who spent decades trying to recover what was taken from them. Survivors and their descendants had been quietly trying to access dormant Swiss accounts since the late 1940s, providing documentation, appealing to banks, writing letters that went unanswered for years. Swiss banks repeatedly stonewalled them, claiming accounts could not be found, that records had been destroyed, that claimants lacked sufficient documentation to prove ownership. This process of institutional amnesia continued for nearly 50 years. By 1996, under mounting pressure from the World Jewish Congress and a series of explosive investigative reports, the Swiss government commissioned an independent panel of historians, the Bergier Commission, to investigate what had actually happened in Swiss banks during and after the war. The Commission's final report, released in 2002 after years of archival research, was devastating. It confirmed that Swiss banks had held hundreds of millions in dormant accounts belonging to Holocaust victims. It documented deliberate resistance to returning those funds. It showed that Swiss institutions had profited directly from the assets of people who had been murdered. In August 1998, before the Commission completed its full report, Swiss banks UBS and Credit Suisse agreed to a global settlement of $1.25 billion to resolve claims from Holocaust survivors and their families. Payments began flowing in 2000. The final distribution of settlement funds continued for years, with the last-significant disbursements made in 2011, meaning that the financial reckoning for crimes committed in the 1930s and 1940s was still being processed 60 to 70 years later. Sovereignty is solvency.